no.
Sit down.
No, that's not a body bag, is it?
Sit down. That's not a body bag. Sit down. Sit down. Listen. Sit down.
Okay, no, I'll sit down. I just, you scared me.
Sit down.
He's not dead, is he?
We don't.
No, they're taking him to the hospital right now.
He's in the hospital right now.
I need to be at the hospital with him.
Courtney Clenney, known to millions online as Courtney Taylor, seemed to have it all. A luxurious lifestyle, millions of followers on OnlyFans and Instagram, and a picture-perfect life in sunny Miami. But beneath the surface of glamour and success, things were not as they seemed. The story begins with her boyfriend, Christian Obumseli, a 27-year-old cryptocurrency investor who was often seen by her side. The two had been dating for nearly 2 years, living together in a luxury apartment in Miami. To the outside world, they appeared to be the ideal couple, beautiful, successful, and madly in love. But behind the closed doors of their high-rise condo, the truth was far from perfect. Neighbors frequently reported loud, aggressive arguments coming from their apartment. Some said they heard shouting that echoed through the building's corridors. But what was really happening? Was this just a couple going through a rough patch, or was there something far more sinister taking place? Courtney's social media posts continued to paint a picture of happiness, showing off her lavish lifestyle, vacations, expensive dinners, and glamorous photo shoots. But friends close to the couple began noticing the cracks. Debates turned into fights, and the fights seemed to escalate, sometimes even becoming physical. What was going on behind the curtain? The tipping point came in early 2022 when an elevator security camera captured a chilling scene. Courtney and Christian in the middle of a heated argument. The footage showed Courtney shoving and hitting Christian repeatedly. Was this just a moment of anger, or was it a sign of a much deeper issue? The neighbors who had reported shouting and disturbances were now witnessing the tensions that had been brewing between the couple for months. But there's more. Records show that in 2021, while vacationing in Las Vegas, the couple had another violent altercation, resulting in Courtney's arrest for domestic battery. So the signs were there. This was not the picture-perfect romance her followers saw on social media. What had led to such a toxic relationship? And more importantly, how would it end? As their relationship continued to spiral, Christian's friends grew increasingly concerned for his safety. They described him as a kind, soft-spoken man who seemed trapped in an unhealthy cycle. Yet, he stayed. Why didn't he leave? Was it love, fear, or something else that kept him there? By the end of March 2022, things had reached a breaking point. Courtney and Christian's arguments became even more frequent and intense. Christian was temporarily kicked out of their apartment, but he returned just days later. And on April 3rd, 2022, everything changed. What happened that day? Why did things escalate so quickly? It was a Sunday afternoon on April 3rd, 2022, when everything changed for Courtney Clenney and Christian Obumseli. The couple's tumultuous relationship had reached its breaking point, and tensions were at an all-time high. What started as another day in their luxurious Miami apartment would soon spiral into a tragic, irreversible event. The day began like any other, with Courtney posting her usual content to her social media channels, her millions of followers unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. But as the hours passed, things began to unravel. Witnesses in the building reported hearing shouting and intense arguing coming from the couple's apartment. Was this just another one of their heated disputes, or was something more sinister about to unfold? Around 5 p.m., neighbors heard a loud scream echo through the hallways. It wasn't the first time they'd heard screams from the apartment, but this time, something felt different. The scream was followed by the sound of shattering glass and what some residents described as frantic movements. One witness claimed they heard a man's voice yelling, "Please, I'm sorry," over and over again. What was going on in that apartment? In the chaos, Courtney made a desperate call to 911. Her voice, panicked and trembling, pleaded for help. She told the dispatcher that her boyfriend had been stabbed. The call was short, urgent, and full of fear, but there were gaps in her story. As emergency responders raced to the scene, one question loomed large. What had happened in those final moments before she made that call? When paramedics arrived at the apartment, they found Christian Obumseli lying on the floor, bleeding heavily from a single stab wound to the chest. He was barely conscious, fighting for his life. Courtney, dressed in a blood-stained top, stood nearby, visibly distressed. But something about her reaction felt off. Was this the reaction of someone who had just witnessed a terrible accident? Or was it something else? Christian was rushed to Jackson Memorial Hospital, but it was too late. Despite efforts to save him, he was pronounced dead. Back at the apartment, police began to piece together the scene. The luxury condo was in disarray. Signs of a struggle were everywhere. Blood spattered across the floor, overturned furniture, and broken glass all told the story of a violent confrontation. But what exactly had led to Christian's fatal wound? Courtney claimed it was an act of self-defense. She told investigators that an argument had escalated and Christian had attacked her. In the struggle, she grabbed a knife to protect herself, stabbing him in the chest. But was she telling the whole truth? As police began interviewing neighbors, they received conflicting accounts. Some described hearing Christian's voice pleading and sounding desperate, while others mentioned that it seemed like Courtney was in control. Who was the aggressor? And who was the victim? The news of Christian's death spread quickly, and so did speculation. The media picked up the story, dubbing Courtney as the Instagram model caught in a crime of passion. Her millions of followers were shocked. How could this have happened? Was Courtney really the victim of a violent altercation? Or was she hiding something more sinister? As investigators dug deeper into the couple's past, they uncovered a troubling pattern. Previous police reports revealed that officers had been called to their apartment on multiple occasions for domestic disturbances. Each time, Courtney had claimed that Christian was the aggressor, and he had been temporarily removed from the residence. But those closest to Christian told a different story. Friends and family insisted that Christian was not the violent type, that he had been trapped in an abusive relationship with Courtney. In the days following Christian's death, Courtney's behavior began to draw suspicion. Despite her initial claims of self-defense, new details emerged. Social media posts and videos showed Courtney out at a bar just days after the incident, seemingly unbothered. Even as the investigation continued, the public started to question, was Courtney's distress in the 911 call genuine, or was it an act? Adding fuel to the fire, security footage from the building's elevator, recorded just weeks before Christian's death, showed a chilling interaction. Courtney was seen physically attacking Christian, shoving, hitting, and yelling at him as he tried to shield himself. The footage painted a disturbing picture, casting doubt on Courtney's self-defense claim. As these revelations came to light, the public began demanding justice. Christian's family spoke out, insisting that their son had been a victim of domestic abuse and that the truth would eventually surface. The case, now a national story, was no longer about a tragic accident. It was a battle for the truth. Courtney, meanwhile, was placed under surveillance but not charged immediately. Authorities stated they needed to piece together the timeline and gather evidence before making an arrest. However, the pressure was mounting. Did Courtney act in self-defense, or was there something far darker behind her actions? In the weeks following Christian Obumseli's tragic death, the investigation into what really happened inside the couple's Miami apartment went into full swing. Police and forensic experts knew they were dealing with more than just a tragic accident. The evidence was starting to tell a darker story, one of violence, manipulation, and control. The media frenzy intensified as more details emerged. Courtney Clenney, the social media influencer with millions of followers, had portrayed herself as a victim. In her initial statements to the police, she claimed that Christian had attacked her in a fit of rage and that she had no choice but to defend herself. But, as detectives pieced together the scene, new questions began to surface. Questions that would turn the entire case on its head. The forensic analysis of the crime scene provided the first major breakthrough. Investigators examined the trajectory of the stab wound that killed Christian, and the results were troubling. According to experts, the wound was too deep and precise to have been inflicted during a chaotic struggle. The knife had penetrated with force, and the angle suggested that it was not a quick defensive motion. It was deliberate. This evidence contradicted Courtney's claim that she had acted instinctively, raising doubts about her story. As the forensic evidence mounted, detectives turned their attention to the patterns of behavior between Courtney and Christian. Interviews with neighbors, who had often reported disturbances, painted a grim picture. Some neighbors described hearing shouting matches, while others reported hearing what sounded like objects being thrown during violent altercations. One neighbor even stated that she had seen Christian with bruises and scratches on multiple occasions, though he always downplayed the incidents, saying they were nothing. But the most chilling testimony came from one of Christian's closest friends, who revealed that he had tried to convince Christian to leave Courtney several times. He was trapped, the friend explained. He loved her, but he was afraid of what would happen if he left. As these accounts began to shed light on what was happening behind closed doors, a cycle of abuse with Courtney allegedly at the center emerged. Detectives uncovered more disturbing pieces of evidence. A review of Courtney's phone records revealed that she had sent threatening text messages to Christian in the weeks leading up to his death. In one message, she warned him that he would regret it if he ever tried to leave her. In another, she mentioned being able to control him. The tone of these messages suggested a relationship where fear and manipulation were used to keep Christian in place. Investigators also found voice recordings saved on Christian's phone of arguments and altercations that he had secretly recorded. In one recording, Courtney was heard screaming, cursing, and threatening Christian while he remained mostly silent, pleading for her to calm down. In another instance, she made explicit threats, saying that she would ruin him if he ever tried to leave. These recordings, along with the text messages, revealed a pattern of behavior that painted Courtney not as a victim, but as the aggressor. With mounting evidence, the authorities faced pressure from the public and Christian's family, who were adamant that their son had been a victim of domestic abuse. They demanded that the police arrest Courtney, accusing her of hiding behind her social media persona to mask the truth. The public was divided. Some of her followers defended her, convinced that she was innocent, while others, swayed by the new information, began to suspect that she had orchestrated the attack. To piece together the events leading up to Christian's death, detectives decided to revisit the 911 call made by Courtney. As they analyzed the call in detail, they noticed several inconsistencies. While Courtney claimed she had acted in self-defense, her tone on the call was panicked, but not entirely consistent with someone who had just experienced a life-threatening situation. Investigators wondered, was she genuinely afraid, or was she attempting to manipulate the narrative in her favor? The most critical piece of evidence came from the building's surveillance footage. After reviewing hours of footage from the day of the incident, detectives saw something that had been missed before. Earlier that day, Christian had been seen leaving the building, appearing calm as he ran an errand. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. He looked anxious, glancing over his shoulder as he entered the elevator. Within minutes, the footage showed him entering the apartment, and shortly after, the sound of loud shouting echoed through the hallway. So, Courtney had claimed that Christian had been the aggressor, but the footage and eyewitness accounts began to suggest otherwise. So, why was Christian so afraid when he returned, and what happened in those crucial moments before the altercation turned deadly? Under pressure, police obtained a search warrant for Courtney's phone and digital records. What they found was startling. In the hours leading up to Christian's death, Courtney had been in a heated exchange of text messages with another individual. The messages were filled with rage, jealousy, and threats, evidence of a relationship unraveling. The last message sent from her phone, moments before she called 911, simply read, "This ends now." Who was she messaging? And what did she mean by that? With this new information, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Detectives realized they weren't dealing with a simple case of self-defense. They were uncovering a tangled web of manipulation, control, and violence. The once glamorous, picture-perfect life of Courtney Clenney was now seen as something much darker. A life where social media masked the truth, and an influencer's fame hid the warning signs of an abusive relationship. Courtney was taken into custody as detectives worked to build their case. The evidence was clear. Christian's death wasn't an accident. It was the result of a toxic relationship pushed to the breaking point. But one question remained. Would justice be served? Or would Courtney's social media stature and influence help her evade the consequences of her actions? Months after the tragic death of Christian Obumseli, the courtroom in Miami was packed with reporters, legal experts, and the public, all waiting for what had become one of the most high-profile trials of the year. Courtney Clenney, the glamorous social media star once known for her lifestyle and online presence, now faced charges of second-degree murder. But would her fame and influence win out over justice? The trial began with a media frenzy. Cameras captured every moment as Courtney, dressed in conservative attire, was led into the courtroom. Her legal team maintained that the events of April 3rd were an act of self-defense, that Courtney had been trapped in an abusive relationship and acted out of fear for her life. But the prosecution had a different story. A story built on forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and digital records that suggested something far darker. In opening statements, the prosecution laid out the evidence, showing the jury how Christian's wounds didn't align with Courtney's self-defense claim. The trajectory and depth of the stab wound indicated precision and force, not a random act of panic. They also presented the elevator footage, earlier highlighting Courtney's violent behavior toward Christian. This was not a one-time incident, they argued, but a pattern of abuse. The prosecution called neighbors and friends to the stand, each sharing their own observations of the couple's relationship. Some neighbors testified to hearing frequent arguments and violent altercations. One particularly chilling account came from a neighbor who said she had seen Courtney physically attack Christian in the apartment's hallway, her face filled with rage. So, it wasn't just a fight, the neighbor said. It was like she was trying to control him. The courtroom was silent, the weight of the testimony hanging heavily in the air. But it wasn't just witness testimonies that painted a disturbing picture. The prosecution unveiled digital evidence, including the threatening text messages and voice recordings. Christian had saved these messages, which revealed Courtney's manipulation, her attempts to intimidate Christian, and her efforts to maintain control over him. The most damning piece of evidence, though, was the final message she sent moments before calling 911. "This ends now." The prosecution argued that this was no cry for help. It was a declaration of intent. But the defense wasn't going down without a fight. Courtney's lawyers portrayed her as the victim, a woman who had been pushed to the breaking point by an allegedly violent partner. They claimed that Christian had been the aggressor, that he had a history of violence, and that Courtney had no choice but to defend herself in a desperate moment. They presented medical records of bruises on Courtney's arms and face, arguing that these were signs of Christian's abuse. Courtney herself took the stand, her voice trembling as she recounted the events of that fateful day. She claimed she had feared for her life when Christian lunged at her, and in a moment of panic, she grabbed the knife to protect herself. Her tears flowed, and for a moment, the courtroom seemed sympathetic. Was she telling the truth? Or is this all part of a well-crafted defense? The turning point came when the prosecution called forensic experts to testify. They dissected the crime scene evidence, explaining how the angle and depth of the stab wound contradicted Courtney's claim of a chaotic struggle. They demonstrated how it would have been impossible for such a precise wound to have been inflicted in self-defense. The expert's testimony was clear. The evidence pointed to an intentional act. The most damning testimony came from Christian's friend, who revealed the contents of a voicemail Christian had left the day before his death. In it, Christian's voice was filled with despair. He spoke of feeling trapped, of wanting to leave Courtney but fearing her reaction. "She'll ruin me if I leave," he said. "I don't know what to do." The voicemail played in the courtroom, and the atmosphere grew tense. Christian had tried to escape, but something had kept him there. Fear, manipulation, or perhaps the hope that things might change. The trial went on for weeks, and the public remained divided. Supporters of Courtney argued that the evidence wasn't enough to convict her, that the prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence and assumptions. But for Christian's family, there was no doubt. Their son had been a victim, and they demanded justice. As the trial neared its conclusion, the prosecution's closing argument summed up their case. Christian Obumseli had been trapped in an abusive relationship, one where Courtney used her influence, manipulation, and violence to maintain control. When she realized he was trying to leave, she made sure he couldn't. They urged the jury to see past her social media persona and recognize the pattern of abuse that had ended in murder. The defense, however, pleaded with the jury to consider Courtney's emotional state, to believe that she had acted out of fear, not malice. They portrayed her as a victim of circumstances, a woman caught in a cycle of violence who had finally snapped in a moment of desperation. So, would the jury believe her story or the prosecution's version of events? After days of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom erupted, some in tears, others in relief. Christian's family embraced one another, their long fight for justice finally paying off. Courtney sat silently, her expression blank as the reality of her conviction set in. The verdict sent a powerful message, a reminder that behind the glamorous facade of social media, the truth is often much darker. Courtney Clenney's case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of manipulation, control, and unchecked power. The once popular influencer was sentenced to prison, but for Christian's family, it was a bittersweet victory. Their son was gone, but at least justice had been served. The story of Courtney Clenney and Christian Obumseli is a chilling reminder that even the most picture-perfect lives can hide dark, destructive secrets. Behind the millions of likes and followers, there was a relationship filled with control, violence, and manipulation, one that ended in tragedy. So, if you found this story compelling and want to hear more cases that reveal the truth behind the headlines, subscribe to our channel, like this video, share your thoughts, and let's continue to bring awareness to stories that need to be told. Thank you for watching, and remember, truth always finds a way to come to light.